So I actually heard Rand Paul talking about this Fifth Amendment when he had one of those. I don't know if it was the Attorney General or one of the other guys, one of the main government legal guys up in front of the Senate, and he mentioned this Fifth Amendment. It's actually not very long, this Fifth Amendment. It's only this bit of text we've got here. So this is actually what the law says. This Fifth Amendment is just what's written here. So I guess how you interpret this is what it actually means. And there have been a lot of legal cases and arguments over it, just like there are over the freedom of speech. The Americans don't seem to be able to agree with their constitution ever hardly, even though they seem at the same time proud of it and always talk of it historically that it's, very good. But they seem to argue about it all the time. I don't think that many people have liked it, and they always seem to like it when they're using it themselves. But then when somebody does something against them that they don't like, then they always say that, oh no, it doesn't apply, right? So it means that they're quite immature with it and quite selfish, and they only value it for themselves and not when it's for other people. Now, I thought that, because the elections are a government process which is meant to be run and operated by the government and paid for by the taxpayer, impartially, right? I've been thinking, what business is it of any other person to come and bring a legal case or a legal challenge for something that's already got its own legal case, and not only its own legal case, one that's already fully funded and paid for? Now, I know that in England we have the NHS, and, if you want, you can get private medical care. And in England, you can get a duty solicitor. They have duty solicitors, but people get private lawyers. In America, they don't have the NHS. You usually always mainly have to go private. But for elections, it's all figured in by the government, And the ironic thing is that the two persons, Biden and Harris, who are the head of the entire American federal government, they're the ones who don't seem happy with their own process of these election counting and ballots, of which they are really in charge of. So they're not happy with their own management of the government, and they're bringing in independent people to do things that they have done wrong because they're in charge. They're actually responsible for all of the, the person in charge at the top is meant to take all the rap for everyone else. This is an actual government process and procedure, They very rarely step in if the police have done something wrong or abused someone. If the police don't do their job properly, you have to go get a lawyer. If you go ask Kamala Harris or Joe Biden to come and help you, then they'd probably give you the two fingers and say, we've got people to do that. But when it's their own election and they're wanting to win, they're like, oh, no, they don't say, no, we've got people who deal with that. They're actually bringing on, and we're bringing our own people in to deal with that. You know what I mean? They rely on the police force to do the work. Why don't Kamala Harris, bring her own police force in? Oh, it's party political, it's for them. But who are them? Well, they are them. They are they who has been elected. Now, anyway, so there's not much writing here. So when Rand Paul was talking to that guy, and he asked him, he said he wouldn't answer any questions. And Rand Paul's like going, you claiming Fifth Amendment rights or whatever, because he didn't want to answer it. But it says here, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on the presentment or indictment of a grand jury. So he was wanting him to ask questions which could have implicated him to the Senate. But I guess he's not in front of a grand jury, but don't the Senate replace the grand jury? I guess it's an infamous crime. There's not really much else about that in here that it could be that Paul Rand meant, except in cases arising from the land or naval forces. But aren't the land forces in the land or naval forces? But does that not actually mean the government and the government's own staff? in the land or naval forces aren't government staff, land force. I mean, what I mean to say is, it's the American government itself, the FBI, the CIA, the courts, the army. Aren't they the force? Aren't they like the type of people who usually, aren't they the government? So that guy, if he was Attorney General or whoever he was, whatever, isn't he part of the American government? The forces of the land, or does it only mean military force? Does it say military? It says arising in the land or naval forces, or in the militia. Well, the militia is the army, or in the militia. Well, the militia is the military. The land or naval forces are all of the. It's America. It's the American government, because the American government have land, but they also operate away from land. Remember, they didn't have planes back then. They didn't have an air force. They didn't invent aeroplanes. So it won't say in the air. It won't say the land or naval or air force, because they didn't have an air force, because they hadn't invented aeroplanes. The Fifth Amendment, I don't think. So because it was before World War I and II, I would have thought. So they don't have arising in the land or naval or air forces, but Air Force One it's called Air Force One. It's not a you don't look at it and think that it's a fighter plane or military, but it is the president's private plane. It's called Air Force One because when he goes abroad overseas, he's acting with the full force of America, the full powers of America. So the land and naval and military forces, the land and naval forces are separate from the military. It means the American government itself, at land or sea, anywhere it is. So surely that's got to mean the Attorney General as well. So no person shall be held to answer for a capital or other what infamous crime, to answer for it, unless in the presentment of a grand jury or an indictment. Well, they hadn't indicted that guy, but they were asking him questions. It says, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces. Well, that's within government. Well, what that means is that government have to answer questions. They can't evade questions. I've actually talked about this before. I've talked about this previously. So what I'm basically saying is that this Fifth Amendment principle is exactly something that I've been thinking of with our government, and that is a dynamic that is in play. And that dynamic is that anyone who is employed by the government, who works for the government or the police or the Crown Prosecution Service or even the local council, like I said in the video the other day when they've got to sign like the selflessness policy or whatever, but other policies, there is a policy that they will tell the truth, right? When they've signed that policy that they will tell the truth, they've got to answer questions. It's called honesty and truth policy. So the honesty and truth policy means that they've got to tell the truth when they're asked. Really, I suppose, like on a Freedom of Information, if someone asks them a question, they can't evade it, but yet they train to not answer or reply now because of all this new work stuff. But this is why I said a proper functioning government with its policies in place should not be able to be corrupt or cannot be corrupt. Not when you're under truth and honesty policy. You sign it and they all act like they're all righteous, but they're not a lot of the time, or you just end up arguing with them. But the truth and honesty policy of the government and staff prevents them from being able to be corrupt or criminal. And that's like, I've said this before, like when a police officer goes to a citizen, they say you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say cannot be used against you in a court of law. But how can someone have the right to remain silent on matters of the government? Now, if if you've got someone who works at the local council or in the Crown Prosecution Service and they went out to a nightclub and they had a fight and they go to work the next day and the police come in and they're asking them a question about what happened at the nightclub and they read them the rights, you've got the right to remain silent, that is their own time and their own life outside of the office in which that occurred and in which the police are questioning them on. If it was something that happened inside the office for purposes of the police or Crown Prosecution Service doing their duty, they have to answer the question because they're in a truth and honesty policy of employment for that purpose and that work. So if the police ask them a question on a fraud investigation and they're working for government, then they have to answer it. Really, a lot of other companies have truth and honesty policy in employment as well. You know, this is the thing. All these big oligarchs like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Google and all these companies, they're getting us to consent, submit, accept, consent, submit, accept all the time on these apps and stuff. They're getting us to consent to all their rules and regulations and policies, you know, to spy on you, take note of what you're saying, gather all your information, send adverts back on things that you're looking at, all these things that we'd rather them not do, but they're just giving themselves the right to do it. They're taking the right, and they're taking the information whether we like it or not, or we can't use their things. They're doing it kind of manipulatively by force. But if you think about it, you know, all those are private companies with their own private policies, but for government, you've got to have truth and honesty. Now, when that guy, I forgot what it was called, the guy with the bald head, I keep thinking it was the Attorney General, but I don't think it is the Attorney General. It's another guy. He was in front of Rand Paul at the Senate, being grilled by Rand Paul, and he wouldn't answer any questions. He actually does have to answer questions because he's a government employee, and it's in his policy to answer questions. He was answering the questions about. It was definitely related to his work and job within the government. It wasn't like out on a Friday night or something at a nightclub. So he did have to answer those questions to Rand Paul. But Rand Paul said to him, you know, are you trying to claim Fifth Amendment rights? But actually, according to these Fifth Amendment rights, because he's a member of the Land Forces of America, which is the government, or away at sea, right? Like Air Force One, that is the president's plane. It's not a fighter plane, is it? But he goes to meetings in it. He goes to see people, presidents, and it's called Air Force One. It's the American government. It's the functioning of American government. You know, but this is for land and naval forces, or in the military, right? But they didn't have Air Force at the time. That government staff member would have to answer infamous crimes. Well, he wouldn't have been in the Senate if it wasn't some infamous, serious, very important, serious. He didn't have to be in front of he didn't have to be on indictment. He didn't have to be on indictment, and he didn't have to be in front of a grand jury. So Rand Paul actually was right to ask him those questions, and really he was, you know, he wouldn't answer, but he should have answered. He was trying to get out of it. This just shows some of the corrupt government staff. Now, so that's that. But the reason I've got the Fifth Amendment up is because I was looking into that double jeopardy law, because I think there are elements of double jeopardy in this, because really the election is a railroad track, right? The election is a railroad track. It's got its own processes and procedures. It's got its own government staff appointed to do roles, even including prosecutors and so forth. And it's all fully funded by the public. They've paid for it, right? Now, if a document is checked by the officer who's meant to check it, and he says, yeah, that's okay, then isn't that the process of like the police or the CPS checking something and deciding whether they're going to prosecute or not? And if they say they're not going to, then clearly there's not enough evidence to show that you've done it, you know, or that it's wrong. So surely it's almost like being acquitted. I know you haven't been acquitted by an actual court, but they're not going to continue the matter. They're not going to pursue the matter to court within that judicial framework which is there with appointed officers, right? And remember, you know, they're all on wages. They're not on for profit. It's not a for profit company. They're paid a wage, or all volunteers, right? So when you get Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, right, who are actually the head of the government, if they're not happy with the ballot checkers and the people who check the ballots, right, why aren't they firing them? Why aren't they firing them or having them up in front of Rand Paul, right, getting grilled? Why didn't you check those ballots properly of Jill Stein's or Robert F. Kennedy's Jr.'s? You're sacked. You're fired, you know, like Trump. No. Instead, what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden do is use electors' money, Democratic electors' money, which they've donated, or possibly even big donors' money, but it all goes into the same pot. We don't know whose money it is. It's Democrat voters' money, right? That's what it is, Democrat voters' money. And they use that Democrat voters' money to pay for an army of lawyers when the public have already paid for the entire government lawyers who are going to take it to court anyway if it's wrong, right? So this is why I'm saying double jeopardy of law, because there is already a legal process in place, or a legal avenue in place, that is meant to be competent, adequate, which is paid for, and then someone else is coming in privately. But not only, I wouldn't mind if it was like, you know, just some random hillbilly from Louisiana up in the hills who just happen upon an old minecart full of gold, and he says, oh, I'll use this money to sue Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for his ballot access. But what it is actually the Democratic Party who not only have these people of the Democratic Party are the actual people who are in charge of the government, which is in charge of the people who are checking the ballots, who they're accountable to, and actually been appointed by, or supposedly, or even elected by the people to do it. You know, it's got double jeopardy of law thing to it, because they're wanting to have it either processed or checked twice, once and by another independent authority, but it's not even being checked by an independent authority. You would have thought that if the government checked the ballots and the election stuff, right, and then they weren't happy with it, then you appeal it higher and higher up within that government system, don't you? But even then, if the government want a second opinion on something, aren't they supposed to get an impartial body in to check it and evaluate it? As far as I know with government, if you want an independent opinion, aren't you supposed to get someone in with an independent opinion to check it and look at it, right? But surely that would, because it's a government process, an election, the whole thing, you would have thought it would have to be the prosecutors as well, not just the judge who's independent, but the whole process for a second opinion, not run by Democrats or run by their actual opponents, you know. If it's almost like in football, isn't it? You know, if you've got a football match, if you're in the World Cup final, it's almost like being in the World Cup final, right, with two teams, right? Or it could be four teams. You know, you could have a pitch split into four. It could be like tennis on, you know, like doubles or whatever you want, right? And the referee or the adjudicator, you got the guy in tennis sat up on the bench thing at the side, on the like swimming pool attendant thing, whatever you call it. The referee, right? The referee blows his whistle, and you know he looks at whether he's going to let someone go or send them off, and he lets them go. He doesn't send them off. Then what do? You know, stop the game and say, "Oh, we want a different referee. We want another referee." Apparently, the referee's decision is final. So why isn't that with the ballots and the election? And even if they did get another referee on, right? Oh, you've got to be kidding me. if you've got a referee in a football match, if you're not happy with the referee or you think that he's made a wrong decision, right, in his adjudication, you don't replace him with a referee who's wearing a shirt of one side or the other. That's for sure, right? Because he's for or against one team or the other. And the thing with this is, it's not just the judge. It's not just this Supreme Court judge or federal judge. The investigation and bringing the case and trying the case is meant to be done by the government staff, right? So if they are the ones responsible for it, if you want a second opinion, then surely the second opinion whole entire process has to be an impartial body to recheck it again, like the checking the forms, counting the ballots, and then actually deciding if they're going to prosecute or not at that level, because they're really Joe Biden and Camilla's staff. And that's why I think it's jeopardy of law, because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are the head of the entire American government. And it's their ballot staff. It doesn't matter if it's all different states. They're meant to be the United States of America in a federal election. You can't have the two people who are in charge of the entire government, right? And those same two people are not happy with their own staff, who they are meant to be in charge of, or ultimately in charge of, at the top of the ladder for the appointment of, and then they go and get their own army of lawyers. They themselves bring an army of lawyers in who aren't even government staff and who actually are not impartial, and then take... Because really, they're not only really... it's not really just a case against RFK Jr. or Jill Stein, because how can you have a case against RFK Jr. and Jill Stein without accusing the actual government's own staff of election fraud? Because if they approved RFK Jr.'s ballot and Jill Stein and RFK Jr.'s ballots in these states, then when they weren't valid, it was later found in court, then aren't they guilty of election fraud? They must be. They must be guilty of election fraud if the Supreme Court's decided that the ballots weren't valid. So that means their own government staff, when they checked them and said they were valid, that means they were committing election fraud. But I don't see them taking any action against them. They don't even seem interested in it. They don't even seem keen. They don't even seem concerned. All they seem to want to do is get the other opponent off there by whatever means necessary. It doesn't add up, and that's why I think it comes into this jeopardy of law thing, because what you've got is, what I'm saying is there are two railroad tracks that they're wanting to use a private, independent legal process and the government one for the same thing. And all it says in this Fifth Amendment, it doesn't say much about jeopardy of law in the Fifth Amendment. They might have made other acts to flesh it out a little bit more and define it. But let's go with what it says actually in this Fifth Amendment. All it says about jeopardy of law is that nor shall any person be subject for the same offence to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall it be compelled in any criminal. It says, nor shall they be compelled to be a witness against himself. Well, that's actually something else that we need to talk about, because nor shall he be compelled to be a witness against himself ties into this judge's oath when you can't do justice for favours, or and in the American wording is that without respect to persons. So that Assange deal, in respect to his own conscience, will do a deal for justice rather than, justice, but based on the evidence obtained and with applied law. You can't negotiate justice or bargain or haggle for it or do deals, scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, or give us some evidence and we'll only do it half the time or whatever, because you're bargaining for justice then. That judge's oath figures into this, will not be compelled to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Well, this is interesting because there are all kind of things here to do with the ballots. The ballots, are the ballots public property? Firstly, are the ballots public property and property of the United States government? And can the ballots be taken and used as evidence by a private party, by a private lawyer, or even the Democrat Party? Has the Democrat Party got the right to seize and take and use all of the ballots from the United States government, vault the DMC party lawyers to take it themselves, to use as evidence in the Supreme Court, when it's property of the United States government and when they've all been handed in? How do they get it? I mean, surely they've got to assess the evidence and look at it. I mean, what do they do? Book a meeting to go into the vault on Goldfinger, What do they do? Take it all home like Trump? Do they take it home like to the house, like Trump had all those documents in his house? Hey, look, we've got all the ballots here. We're just going to check all Jill Stein's to see if that they conform properly, and then we'll, choose what we're sending into the court, and then turn up and prosecute them. But you need to look at the evidence and assess it, don't you? So they're allowed to seize and take all of the ballots away from the American government. Yeah, right. I buy that for $1, right? Taking property from the American government. Yeah, it's for a legal process, but it's already been used in a process, though, isn't it? They've got their own process. It's deprived of life on liberty. Really, that those elections are a petition, really. They actually are a petition. Liberty or property without due process of law. Well, the thing is, without a due process of law, there is a due process in they're going through, and they've been through the due process, haven't they? They've been through the due process of the election, and they're going through it, and all the ballots got approved for RFK Jr. And Jill Stein in some of these cases, right? And this is the thing. Due process of law, when you're going through due process of law, when you challenge it, you usually have you have to have a judicial review, don't you? It's like a judicial review. So why is an independent lawyer or an independent party seizing ballots or reckoning that he can seize ballots if he wanted to investigate it privately, even if it's with a federal judge ultimately in the court, when there's already a due process of law in, and surely haven't the government got their own judicial review process where if you want it judicial reviewed, and the judicial review is like an internal process, isn't it? And why isn't there an internal appeal process? If those persons who check the ballots, if the opponents don't agree, then they nominate to have it raised up within the government to another court, right? Or is that what they're actually doing? But you're not nominating it to have an internal judicial review by another court if you're bringing a load of private lawyers in a private case, or is that what it effectively is? are Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, the Democrat Party, are they kind of having an internal judicial review? Is that what it is? With that judge, but they just got an army of lawyers to do it. But who's actually running the judicial review? I thought the government had attorneys and peoples in place within the government to check it. Their own people. Haven't they got their own people to check it? And their own lawyers who supposedly are meant to be impartial, checking the evidence and so forth, so whether it should be put through. It all seems like you've got two authorities. It seems like you've got an authority who is responsible for something in a track, and you're bringing in private. Now, imagine if in England loads of people had plenty of money spare. They'd be wanting to challenge the government on everything, the legal ombudsman on everything, and challenge the Advertising Standards Authority on everything, or Ofcom on everything. But all those authorities are there because we paid for them, and they're meant to do the job for us. Now, if you had a load of money, you wouldn't need to go to Ofcom, because you could just go to court and prosecute GB News anyway. Or if you had plenty of money, you could get a lawyer and directly go against an advertisement. But this is the thing. There are those places in place that are going to do it. Now, whether they do a good job or not, fair enough. But you're supposed to use them, and if you're not happy with them, you can raise it up to the ombudsman. Where was them raising it up to the equivalent of the ombudsman in America or whatever? And at the end of the day, advertising standards, Ofcom, and ombudsman and so forth, it's not an election. It isn't an election. I just don't understand how independent lawyers who are on actually being paid to serve one side or one party over another are doing their own legal process when there's meant to be one in place that doesn't seem to be being pursued within the government and its own thing. Unless I'm wrong, unless that effectively it's kind of like a judicial review or some sort of election petition that's just they've paid for their lawyer. But who's bringing the case though? It seems like it's this other party that's bringing it, not the federal government. Don't the people who check it, isn't the case meant to be brought against the candidates by the federal government? It's meant to be the federal government versus the candidates. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's meant to be federal government versus candidates, right? In England it says, versus Regina or whatever, the defendant versus Regina. It only has another party on it if it's a private party in a private civil dispute. If it's John Smith versus Randall or whatever, that's between two parties, not the government. So why is it, the Democrat Party, right, versus Kennedy, or some people acting on behalf of the Democrat Party who aren't the government versus Kennedy? Because that's like a private suit, innit? In a private suit against Party A and Party B, the private suit is against Party A and Party B, right? But that's not anything to do with the government, though, is it? But what they're actually doing is they're taking Kennedy to court and having him in the court and saying to the judge, this is Mr. Kennedy, he didn't fill his form in properly, right? But Kennedy's not the person who checks the forms, is he? He doesn't check them. He fills them in. It's not like shipping trading company versus space station. It's not two independent parties against each other in a civil suit, is it? How can it be Democrat Party people versus Kennedy Jr.? Because that is in an independent civil case between two private parties. And the party Kennedy was engaged in a government process which is governed and moderated by the government. So if he doesn't do that properly, surely it's the federal government versus Kennedy. Now, why isn't Harris and Biden, why isn't it the federal government versus Kennedy? All the way up through the courts, all the way from, all the way up through the courts, appeal. And the reason is that apparently if those people who check it say that it's all right. Okay? So if Biden and Camilla aren't happy with it, why don't they just sack them? It's they're stepping out of the car and hitting the bonnet with something. It's that, it's there's something wrong about it. There's some element of it that isn't right, because it's like third party or something. When you get in a bus, right, and say, right, let's go do an election, everyone gets in the bus and say, right, we're going to do an election. That means that there's like the staff there, the ballot checkers, both the opponent, the Lib, the Dem, Kennedy, the others. It's like the mystery machine. Okay, we're all on the bus. Let's go do the election. Right, we're doing the election now. And then someone comes and crashes into the side of it. Right, the Dems with the legal case. But the people who are driving is Camilla and Biden, who are meant to be sat in the fucking bus because they're in charge of the entire fucking government. It's like the mystery. It's like the mystery machine. It's like, hey, Kamala and Joe Biden have just crashed into the side of the bus in a Chevy, but here they are sat next to me inside the mystery machine. We're on our way to the election. Everyone in the mystery machine. How do you do that? That's kind of like the thing. There's something wrong with it, and that's what 5013C is. It is illegal campaign intervention in campaigns, particularly when there are all these independent lawyers making loads of money out of it and so forth. But anyway, going back to this document here, so there's that thing about answering questions honestly. Maybe Rand Paul was talking about that no one shall be compelled to be a witness against himself. But if you look at the top part, it says no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on the presentment of indictment or a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the military. Well, that guy working for the government, whether he was the Attorney General or that other guy, he will be under a truth and honesty policy, right? And he didn't have to be on an indictment. He doesn't have to be on an indictment at all, or in front of a grand jury. He has to answer because he's under oath. And to be honest, this part about witness in a criminal case, well, in fact, it isn't actually, if he hadn't been indicted, unless a presentment of indictment, except for cases arising out of the line of military. So there's an exception there. There is actually an exception there because they're under. I don't know if maybe that's what martial law is. I'm not sure, but I think that he would have to answer the questions to Kennedy. To Rand Paul. Because I've actually, it's funny that matter came up with Rand Paul because I've pondered this before. And I'm like, well, actually, it's not capital crime, is it? Look, it says, just be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. But what about these infamous crime, capital or infamous crime? I'm kind of pretty sure that I think that it means that, like if it's in your own time or your own sort of I don't think that it's things that you've done while under employment of the federal government, because you are under it's like the policy overrides the oath. And the thing with that is that all these people like Bill Gates now and Jeff Bezos and Google, they've all got us under this kind of policies that we have to stick to, and they're actually recording us saying things that the police will therefore seize off you and take it as evidence from them, and it will be used against you. So it's almost like they're giving themselves the right to monitor and track and surveil everyone and then use it as evidence when it says that they can't compel you to give evidence against yourself in a criminal case. So if the evidence is on a digital file, if the evidence is on a digital record, and that's yours, how can they compel you to give over that statement, that record, that statement of record? You can't be compelled to be a witness against yourself. But it seems like Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and everyone now are just taking your statement and they are compelling you. They are compelling you. Well, they're compelling you by their policy, aren't they? What Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos are doing by making you sign all these policies to these devices, right? You can't use their devices unless they can consent to recording your voice and taking your information, and then the police can take it off them. They're compelling you to be a witness against yourself or on record, and that's what they're doing in Scotland now with that Mr. Shiraz, that SNP guy who was the First Minister of Scotland. He's letting the police go into your house and just listening to you and take your things, and that will be offered as evidence to a court, and you're compelled to give it over. You know, just like in driving offences now, where they say who was the driver. They've done that in England. They got round it. So all these principles in law that we've had and built up over many, many years for reasons, many reasons, they're overriding them all. And this is what I'm saying with the driving offences with the police, you know, when they're just holding pleas in the police station and giving you convictions and so forth. And I'll tell you what the reason is. They don't, all they want to do is, this is what they want law to be in the future. Keir Starmer says, you know, the NHS is going to have to reform or die. I think that he will actually kill us all, you know, and 77th Brigade can stick that comment where they want, right? What this NATO thing, this Davos, What's Starmer and Davos and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and all these Charles and all these globalists really want the new world order to be is that you aren't judged by your peers. You don't have the right to a fair trial. And they don't want people's communities and other fellow persons judging them and deciding whether they should be convicted or not. All they want to do, and to be honest, they just want the data. They just want the surveillance. They want to film everything and know everything what's happening. And if they film you or a device sees you doing something which says that, you know, you shouldn't do this, they just want to send you a fine out straight away or say you're guilty. They want the state to be your judge and jury, a device, a camera to be your judge and jury. That's what they want. They want your mobile phone and a camera to be your judge and jury and able to convict you of legislation which they're putting through, and that these party delegates choose, you know, who's your president, who do you want, Trump or Biden. Not even people that we've elected and who have competed fairly. Private entities, private parties decide who their offering is, who their candidate is. A private corporate group says, we're putting Kamala Harris. Another private corporate group says, we're having Joe Biden. They've all got the same NATO interests, and they say, flip a coin, who do you want to be in charge of the country? We haven't elected them or voted them or chosen them. And all the companies say that we've got to consent to it. These people, well, you haven't got a judge and jury when you've only got a magistrate and they've taken all the people out of the Magistrates' court. There's no jury in the magistrates' court. And now with all the foreign immigration and the racial divides and the religious divides, would you even want a jury? You know, are you being judged by your equals? You know, do you understand and have the same belief system as you, the same customs as you? You know, look at Tommy. Look at this Tommy guy, whatever he's called, for this Human Defence League. Tommy Robinson. You know, he's got very different beliefs to a lot of people. You know, certain beliefs. And how they're doing it is policy. Consent. We're building the future and we own it. And if you don't consent to it, you can't use it. You won't be able to enter our company premises, use our supermarkets, use our mobile phones, watch our TVs. You know, if you don't consent to their policies, you won't be able to live in their world. That's what Starmer says, reform or die. And I think that Starmer means it. I think Starmer is NATO Gestapo Nazi, and I think that he's going to kill us all. And, you know, he's just killed the old people because hardly any of the old age pensioners voted for Labour. And he's cut all their fuel allowance. You know, he kicked people, he took the whip from people who didn't vote his way in Parliament. And now he's coming out with things like, you know, the NHS is going to die. It's a corporate takeover. It's a corporate takeover. And I'm going away from the subject of what I wanted to talk about, which was just this little bit of the Fifth Amendment about double jeopardy. But I ended up talking about other stuff. What it says is, it only says that nor shall any person be subject to the same offence to be twice put in jeopardy of life, limb, nor shall be compelled to be witness against himself. So the thing here is the word subject. It says, nor shall any person be subject for the same offence to be twice put in jeopardy. So, subject, well, this is like the right to petition. You are the subject. You are a subject of the realm or a subject of the United States. But the word subject also means being subjected to, put to. But it also means the matter that you're talking about. So the subject means that it's like, you know, what's the crime? You know, what's the crime or the charge or the offence, you know? Subject to. I don't know if it extends to civil law and criminal law, because apparently you can be sued for something, but you can also be prosecuted for it. I know for sure that they're definitely not doing the double jeopardy of law thing for civil and criminal cases. I think it might only apply to criminal cases, not to civil ones, or else you won't be able to have a civil and a criminal case over the same matter. And I know a lot of people are doing that. Maybe we're not supposed to have civil and criminal cases over the same matter, because in the civil rules, there is a number of clauses in the civil rules that if it comes to the attention of the court or the awareness in proceedings of a crime-taking offence, it can be dealt with by that court. Even though it's a county court and you're not meant to have crime in a county court, they can deal with or refer matters. But then this is the thing, it's arisen from the same circumstances, you know. So that's something that I don't know the answer to that, if it's only criminal. But I still think that when it says the subject, it means that the matter what you're talking about, it means that the you know, the subject content, which is if it's the election, right? If you have been to an election and your stuff's been approved, it's been approved by an official, right, and checked, then, you know, how many times do you want it checking? You know, I mean, how many different officials are there going to be? Aren't you in jeopardy? Isn't that some kind of jeopardy of, because, you know, you might have about 10 different, you could end up, it's really like in a football match and having two referees, or then saying you want a third one and then a fourth one, then a fifth one, you know. There's something not right about it. And I'm pretty sure that 501c3, the illegal campaign intervention, is meant to protect you from these jeopardies in elections, jeopardies from opponents, jeopardy of all manner of jeopardies. And if it's meant to protect you from being at jeopardy, what is the point in 501c3? It's to protect you from your opponents or any other entities, non-profit entities or whatever, somehow intervening in what you're doing, maybe possibly even the police from preventing you from going around and collecting the ballots, because, you know, that's why you've got illegal canvassing by police officers and so forth. You know, even the police officers aren't allowed to, you know, get too involved in the campaigns. There's a certain things that they can be offences, but usually those offences only arise from those election petitions, which is a special mode and form of trial and so forth. So 501c protects against jeopardies of election campaigns. What would be putting you at jeopardy if you were a candidate? Well, this is the thing. What Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was saying is that he was saying that there's this new thing called lawfare instead of warfare. Lawfare. But isn't that what the double jeopardy of law rule is there to prevent? The double jeopardy of law rule is there to prevent lawfare. Basically abusing or misusing the law or using it multiple times against someone. But the word jeopardy means at risk. Double jeopardy means twice at risk. But the word single jeopardy just means you're at risk. Militia, we're natural danger. What or public danger? Nor shall any person be subject for the same offence to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. But twice put in jeopardy. Twice. But jeopardy is at risk. You're at risk. Well, you're at risk when you first do the campaign and it gets checked, because you're at risk of it being rejected, aren't you? This is what I'm trying to get at with that. You're at risk. You know, you're having it checked. You're having a proper process and procedure. A government, let's not forget this, a government process and procedure are checking it, right? And once they put the stamp on it and approve it, I'm pretty sure they've decided that they're not going to reject it or take legal action against you. You know, it isn't, once it's been approved and stamped, isn't that it? Isn't that official? Isn't that like, oh, it's officially been accepted? How can the Harris and Biden challenge it when it would have been accepted? Because it was the government who accepted it. Kennedy didn't validate it. He didn't do anything wrong. But they got him in court and he had to turn up. Now, maybe those officials had to turn up as well and give evidence. But if they approved it, right? If Jill Stein's and Kennedy's were accepted and approved, and then they walked away, then they haven't done anything wrong, because they did it and it was approved by the government. So isn't the target of the legal challenge the actual government? So why does it say Kennedy versus whatever on the thing? Because it's not against Kennedy, is it? It isn't against Kennedy. It's like internal government department against each other. It's like, and if it is internal government department against each other, if it's like President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the vice president, versus, you know, Louisiana ballot access department. Isn't that the case? And if that's the case, then where's all this private lawyers and funding and money coming from? And why are they making a shitload of money out of it? because haven't the government got their own? Well, what do you do when it's government versus government? Well, you've got Attorney General. Each state's got an Attorney General. If the state of Kentucky, if that state's commissioners and ballot access stamp and approve something, right, then that Attorney General from that state has got to represent the decision and stand up for those officials. So surely it's got to be, the state of, whatever Kentucky, right? Because they'd stamped it, they'd sealed it, and they get their Attorney General, right? Like in Atlanta, they've got that Chris Carr guy, Attorney General, who's, like a nutcase trying to prosecute protesters all the time illegally, right? With wacko cases. But, if the officials in one state stamp and approve something and say, okay, we've passed it, then surely they direct their state's Attorney General to defend them and their decision in court. And surely that's paid for by the taxpayer in that state. Because once it's stamped and approved, then Kennedy is represented by the taxpayer. Kennedy's on the ballot, and it's the taxpayer who are going to defend him because he's on there. The taxpayer are going to defend Kennedy because he's one of the 4 options they've got, and he's officially on there. So surely it's got to be Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in their capacity as president and vice president in the White House versus the Attorney General of, state X, whatever, Kentucky or Mississippi or Missouri or whatever it is, the Attorney General of Missouri, whatever, versus the President, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. That's the money, that's the funding. Where's the money coming from? The voters, the taxpayer, because, elections are for non-profit. So what the flying fuck are the Democratic Party doing themselves as a non-government entity who want to beat these other people, using taxpayers' money, who have already paid for the Attorney General in each state, with their own lawyers against Kennedy, who he had his thing approved. If he had it approved, then why are they putting a legal case against him? Who approved it? The person who approved it is a legal case against. But the thing is that as Democrats, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and the Democrats don't want the state's Attorney General, who has to really represent the decision of the ballot staff. They don't like the fact that there were Democrat, Republican, and Green Party and Kennedy voters all in that state, and they don't want the Attorney General to be representing for Kennedy, not against him, when there were 4 people on the ballot. But it won for all and all for one. That Attorney General, it's been approved. It's one for all and all for one. That Attorney General is in for all of those people on the ballot. He goes with what the ballot access people say. They approved it. So, he should stand by them on that, really. And if Biden and Harris want a challenge, then he should be the President of the United States of America and Vice President versus the Attorney General of whatever state. If that state, that was that state's decision, they made it on behalf of all of the people of that state. And, but if they're saying some of the Democrats in that state don't like it, well, who's bringing this case here? Let's follow the trail. Was it really the people in that state? Well, just a minute. It's not an election for Congress. So it's an election for the president. Is there someone in that state who they're not even making them vote for someone who's from that state now? That's the irony of it. They're not even you've got to write down someone's name who's from the state and someone from out of the state. So the Attorney General for whatever state they want to kick them off the ballot off, them people from that state who are Democrats aren't even voting from anyone from their state. They're just voting for Trump or Harris now. So it's still it's still Harris Biden. You know, it's Harris Biden. You know, so it's non-profit, isn't it? But I won't be surprised if, you know, it seems like a perfect opportunity to make some money out of it, doesn't it? Or, you know, you are capable. You know, if you're suddenly capable of being able to have a try at it, you know, why not try? It's almost kind of like lining up 20 footballs and seeing how many you can get in the goal, you know. And the amounts of funding they've got and all these DNC rallies with all these top football stadium, you know, VIP rooms or whatever, it seems like they can throw as many cases at it. In fact, it's a shame there aren't more candidates. You know, they could have more legal cases. It seems like they can make a case, and then there's the best ballot access lawyer in America. Like you can have one. You know, how is it the best how do you have ballot access lawyers? You know, are the government meant to check all that? I mean, if they turn you away, you might want one for yourself, but even then, one of the parties, even if Kennedy himself got turned away from the ballot by the people who are checking it, it's Kennedy versus